As to whether, thank you. Whether any member of the committee knows of any conflict of interest or appearance of conflict with respect to matters before the committee today. If you know of a conflict or an appearance of a conflict, please indicate at this time. Hearing none, I think we're just fine there. Second matter then is the approval of the minutes from the July 10th meeting of the committee. And I'm going to defer to the Director Abrazinskis on that because we've got one modification on that. Commissioner Lyerly then. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Carter. My motion would be to amend the minutes to include the statement, Commissioner H. Kim Lyerly observed the meeting as a guest on WebEx. And this is to ensure that the language for this event was consistent across all of the minutes that would be generated for the meetings, for the committees and subcommittees for the EMC for the last meeting. So this would be the standardized language describing the event of my participation.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much for that. And I'm also going to inquire of Commissioner Duggan, since he was good enough to chair that meeting, and just see if he has any other suggestions or changes to the minutes.
I don't see any needed changes to those minutes.
Okay. Then as amended by Commissioner Lyerly, I'd like to, excuse me. Exactly. Oh, amend and then a second motion? Oh, all right. Well, first, we're going to have two motions, and the first will be to amend the minutes as indicated by Commissioner Lyerly.
I move we amend the minutes as requested by Commissioner Lyerly.
Okay. A motion, second?
I'll second.
All right, second by Commissioner Duggan. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, then the minutes, the draft minutes are amended. Now I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Duggan, a second.
Second.
Commissioner Lyerly seconds. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None, so they are approved unanimously. Now, let's move to the action items. And I will call up Barry Piggott from DAQ. This is approval to proceed to the full commission on the public comment revisions to permit review timelines and definitions pursuant to session law 2023-134, section 12.11, and the regulatory impact analysis accompanying it.
Good morning, commissioners. My name is Carrie. Thank you for that. And we're going to look at this rulemaking package. And of course, this one we have titled Revisions to Permit Review Timelines and Definitions Pursuant to Session Law 2023-134. This concept had previously been presented in May of this year. This is our typical addition of list of acronyms. These should all be familiar and typical for the commissioners today. So a little background, the reason for this rulemaking was initiated because there was session law at the end of 2023 that was passed, and it was in section 1211 of that session law, and it had to do with air permitting review and issuance of timelines. So to address the changes that were incorporated into the general statutes, we initiated this particular rulemaking. And it does two things. It's going to introduce some new timelines to our permitting processing review of our applications for permit modifications. And two, it's going to incorporate a new idea called this administratively complete. And that's important because it starts when those time periods will start. So it's kind of like defining the beginning of that point, which before had not existed. So in specifics, there's going to be a 90 calendar day included for those minor modifications that are minor in nature, as how the session law wrote it, and 270 calendar days for those that are major modifications in the way that the session law had written this. And of course, in the statute, the term administratively complete was incorporated. So let's go over what our current permit processing and how that currently is done. There's a couple steps that's written up there, 1 through 4. Some of these are going to be staying the same, and some of these are going to be shifting and merging. So this is just telling you how we do it currently. First, there's a 10-day window after receipt where we acknowledge that an application came in. We're also determining if a payment had been completed in that time. Then there's under current rules, 45 days for receiving the application and where the application itself is considered and reviewed. And that's sometimes just checking to make sure that all the sections of the application are complete. And then after that, there's a technical completeness. Now you'll see that's 45 days, 45 days. If you added them up, it'd be 90. And those are processing days, not calendar days. So there is some start and stop pausing in that. And I will make note that there is a special exception for MACT review, and that's in keeping with EPA requirements. So if we look at the agency action, that's going to be the same according with the session law. So the timeline still ends when the permit application is either issued, denied, or proceeds to public notice. Now, this is with Title V permit modification applications, and these are minor ones and also our significant 1 steps. Now, our applicants get to choose if they want a 1-step or 2-step, but we're going to get to the 2-step on the next slide. So kind of similar to the non-Title V applications, there's still that 10-day window of opportunity of where the state just reviews that an application was received and that a payment was made. And then it's going to be 60 days instead of 45 days for that completeness. And then there's a technical completeness review. And then there's for agency action, there's 90 days for minor mods, 270 days for those that are significant 1-step. Now there are significant 2-step Title V permit modifications, and that's actually a choice that the Title V applicant would make. But why would they ever make that? Because you would think, oh, well, now they have to do 2 steps. The total process may take longer to review, but they may actually choose this because if they finish the 1-step and we've already done a partial review, they may actually be able to start their construction under our O2Q300 rules. That's the construction operation rules. And so they can actually start working on it even while the second part of the review is getting done. Sometimes they can even start operation earlier, depending on the particular nature of that modification. So while the time of permit issuance may take longer in total, they might actually get to their goal a little bit sooner. So that's why sometimes a facility would choose that step. And that's what we're doing right now. So let's get into what the session law is changing. And of note, it's the processing days versus calendar days. So processing days is a system where when, kind of like a hot potato, when the division staff engineer are actively reviewing a permit and they have all the information from the applicant, they are on the clock, so to say. But when they get to a point in the review that they need additional information from the applicant, they're going to contact the applicant, they're going to request the information. It could be several items, it could be 1 item that they need to move forward. Maybe there's modeling missing. Then the clock pauses. So that's the current system. Moving forward, because there's calendar days and it's been interpreted to mean that there's no pause or stop, it's going to be a more defined end date. That also means that when that information is getting requested and whatnot, there's going to be a little bit more of a time crunch for it. And this is only applying to part of the process. So moving on, we got some visuals. I like visuals. That always helps me in understanding a complicated thing like these processing timelines. And so we're going to go through that. Okay, so this is the new practice moving forward. So in general, for all of this, it's going to be more simplified down to kind of a 3-step. So just think about that. Still going to have the 10 days acknowledge acceptance. There's still going to be a completeness review. That portion still gets some pausing and stopping because it's outside of these required statutory strict calendar days. And then we get into this agency action, the 3rd step. That's where those kind of stricter timelines are coming in. And this is just a nice visual timeline so you can see it all the way from the beginning to the end. Notice those 10 days are overlapping with those 45 days because those are happening simultaneously. And that's the portion where staff can still request information, still be looking at the application and making sure that it's totally complete. It is, just qualitatively letting you know, it's very rare to have a fully complete application from day one. In a rare instance, if that did happen though, they would be guaranteed 45 days and then the 90 days would start. And that's in keeping with our rules. And that's how the new rule language is written, is to reflect this visual timeline. And this is for non-Title V permit modifications under our O2Q 300 procedures. And this is that construction permitting rules. Yes.
Chair, can I ask a question? So what happens if during that 45 time period, the applicant doesn't get back to you with the information requested? Is it just?
So that would be a pause, and that would be extremely rare. Applicants always have the option to withdraw if they don't feel like they can have information, but it would just be kind of held and paused. So there wouldn't be any detriment as far as when these stricter kind of 90-day calendar day part of the decision-making comes into effect, if it's still in that first part and the application is not complete itself.
Thank you.
Question.
Yes, go ahead.
In the completeness review period, are there commonalities of deficiencies? Are there frequent things that are commonly missed?
This is something that was actually talked internally quite heavily. The issue is every facility is so unique throughout the state. Even if you would think a facility is operating and creating like maybe even a similar product, it is still very location heavy. And so and the technology and how everything's interfaced is so unique. It's difficult to find commonalities because it's just different for each applicant and the parts that could be missing. I think I did give one example, like maybe modeling was missing. Sometimes when applicants read certain instructions, they may think that they don't necessarily need to include modeling, but then it's identified that for this particular modification, they actually do need it. That's the best example I can give that's more general, but that's not even common. That's just in some, that's just to give an example.
Thank you.
So moving on to our Title V minor modifications. These rules are under O2Q 500s. Of course, those are our Title V permitting rules. And if you notice, the 10 days is overlapping. This one's a little different because of how this rule interacts with Part 70 requirements. And so you'll notice that that is 90 days from the receipt because there's some unique qualifications for minor modifications. And you can look up under our O2Q 515 rule. There's some more specifics on why that is and the specific references to Part 70 and why that's under. Our Title V permitting program is heavily directed and in compliance with the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 70. And so that's why this one looks a little different. And now under our Title V significant modification applicants that chose a one-step process, it's going to have the 10 days. Notice that's, again, pretty similar to the way our O2Q 300s are. It's going to be simultaneous with those 60 days to just see if the application is complete or not. A lot of review is happening in that period. just to make sure that all the information necessary to see that the emissions are, being properly evaluated. And then the 270 days start, and that's about 9 months. And then with the two-step, you can kind of see it's a combination of that O2Q 300 non-Title V processing timeline. And then once that's finished, they're not happening at the same time. You actually do the first step all by itself. That gets done first. And then you start the second step. So I know on this graph, it looks a little bit like they're happening at the same time. They're not. The first step is completed in its entirety, and then it moves on to the second step. So in this proposal, we really did try to narrow down just the core rules that needed to be changed in keeping with the statutory change. We try not to change more than what is absolutely necessary. And you can see here, it is a little bit of a mirror between the two rules, our group of rules, our O2Q 300, which are construction operation permits, and our Title V procedure permits under the O2Q 500. We needed to change a definition in both of those. We needed to look at the application rule, the application submittal content rule. That kind of makes sense in describing this rulemaking. And then the processing schedule. So O2Q 312 and O2Q 525 are kind of parallel rules. And then the minor permit modification, like I explained earlier, has its own CFR Part 70 requirements. And so that one had timelines within it that needed to come in line with the new statutory requirement. This is a slide just quickly summarizing those changes. And they all kind of make sense in that, a definition was added to the definition rule. The applications just included some clarifying language so that it was all consistent between the rules. But the core of the rules that I'm going to go over in detail are the actual process rules that are incorporating the new days in them. So the 90 days into 270-day language. And that's our Rule 312, 515, and 525. So beginning with Rule 312, whoop, I must have done something. I have no idea. It's just a little bit smaller. So in this rule, I just want to make sure that I don't forget to say anything important. So the Rule 312 is quite a long rule. And originally the rule applied to all kinds of permit applications, new permit applications, renewal permit applications, modifications. So the main thing that we did to this rule structurally was actually separate out and make distinct that modification applications are going to be their own thing. And so we actually created paragraph B. So this slide is really just explaining what's staying the same for paragraph A, which is all of our new and renewal applicants are basically keeping the same timelines that they already have. So no changes to the ones that are outside of what the session law changed. And this is just getting into more details about exact changes that were made. There were one thing that was deemed obsolete at this point, and some other changes that were done. But this is really all showing that paragraph B, some of the parts that are remaining the same, like that 10 days are remaining same, are going to be pointing up to our paragraph A. And the parts that are going to be consistent between new and renewal applications and our modification application. So there are parts of the process that are remaining consistent, which is easier to see, I think, in those previous slides when I showed the graphic. And here we get into more details of paragraph B. That's the new introduced language. This is going to be new stuff. And this is where the 90 days itself is being added and specifically written out as 90 calendar days of receiving a complete application. And of course, we know it's complete after that 45-day period processing days of review. So 312 had various, lots of changes to it, and those slides are just nice and summarizing each one. Then we get into O2Q 515. So there were a couple things in here that we needed to change. Most importantly, this is the rule that's including the 90 calendar day language. And our 525 rule is going to be pointing to that for minor modifications and incorporating in itself the 270-day calendar days in it for significant modifications. And of course, the 270-day calendars part applies to all significant modifications as an aspect. So let's get into the RIA. So it was, one of the challenges of this regulatory impact analysis was thinking about, what is the impact? How is this going to change, how stakeholders, might change how they do things, how us as an agency is going to change things. Is this going to impact our local government entities? There didn't appear to be any change to local entities. For us as a state agency, and I think also for our applicants, there's going to just be more certainty. So that's going to be one of the things that can be seen as a potential benefit to this, is that when you hit either that 90-day time period or that 270 days, there's an end date and a decision's going to be made at that point. Now, you hope you have all the information necessary. Sometimes, the state may still have to request information during that period. At any point of a permit's application review, information can be requested at any point. But right now, there's not going to be an additional 10 days to wait or any of that pausing and stopping the process. There's going to be a definitive date for a decision. On the other hand, for some of our applicants that may have less sophistication, it may be a little harder for them because they won't have that flexibility of the pause and start to get all the information in quick enough. So that could be a challenge for some applicants that may not have the resources or the personnel to respond as quickly as some of our other applicants. And so that's getting into the issue of, could there potentially be more withdrawals? Possibly, but maybe not, because applicants may do more to prepare on the front end before they submit to the state. Whereas now, because there's pausing and stopping, they might be quicker to some applications. So those are things that are kind of hard to guess, but we did describe them within the regulatory impact analysis just so that we acknowledge that we were thinking about them as considerations. As far as dollar amount, it was really difficult to think of, how is this going to financially impact? Because this isn't like adding a new equipment requirement or a new, inspection requirement or, that kind of thing, which typically comes with an associated cost. So the best we could come up with, OSBM, wanted us to consider, of course, was, well, if the timeline for review is going to be a little bit stricter, the potential for maybe needing to hire more expert, permit application preparers could potentially happen. So you'll see here, we did include the cost of what a typical qualified consultant that could prepare a permit, anywhere from $43 to $50 an hour kind of was. But we didn't actually include that there had to be a cost, because of course that's a choice by the applicants themselves. Of course, because our permitting review still has to meet all the EPA standards, our Title V program gets reviewed every 5 years by the EPA for its effectiveness and quality of the program. There's not going to be any impact to environmental changes or emissions, because the quality of the review has to still meet all of our statutory obligations for our division, and that's including state and federal. And this RIA was approved August 30th this year. So looking forward where we're going to be going, we're hoping that the AQC today likes this group of rules, sees it as necessary. We're kind of under a tight timeline for this particular rulemaking. And if we can get it passed today, then we'd be going before the EMC in November and hopefully have an RRC commission approval looking next April. Now, we usually include an effective date on this, but with this rule-making package, it's a little different, so the next slide's going to get into that. So talking about an implementation date, there was a follow-up technical corrections to the original 2023 134 session law, and that was 2024-1, and that was just this spring that made through. And that one is giving a timeline for this rulemaking. That is that we need to have some kind of application to the EPA requesting approval of these changes that we're making to our DAQ rules. And our deadline is July 1st next summer. So that's kind of why I showed you the timeline and showed you like how we hope to meet this requirement. And this kind of gets into how we're preparing for that. We're going to be including a special history note for that. And that history note is going to be in keeping with RRC's requirements. So we do recommend that the committee approve the proposed rule amendments to 15A NCAC 02Q 303, 304, 305, 312, 503, 505, 507, 515, 525, and the accompanying regulatory impact analysis to proceed to the EMC for approval to proceed to public comment. Of course, this is our contact information. And then if anyone has any questions, I would be absolutely happy to get to it.
Oh, Commissioner Bailey.
This is Commissioner Bailey. I had a question about how after the 45 days is completed.
Which timeline was this? Was this the
Any one of
300?
them, it's just after that first.
Some are 60 days and some are 45
yeah,
days.
After the first completeness determination. We talked about it pausing in that first period before the completeness. So, once they're doing the technical review, is the application also can be paused then, or is that different now?
So that's why, if you noticed on this slide right here in the steps, we didn't distinguish between a completeness review and a technical review, because now it's going to be, part of those are going to be merged. Now, obviously, when you're doing a permit review, which I don't have any direct personal experience doing, I will just put a disclaimer out there. I'm not a permit engineer and don't have experience doing that. But from, working with our internal staff and asking them about the process and everything in preparing for this rulemaking, there are some things that can be done simultaneous, but of course not all things. So the best I can say is there will be some technical aspects that are reviewed in that 45 days and some that are reviewed during those 90 days.
And then the question is during the 90 days or the 270, whatever it is it also paused during there?
There's no pause.
No
because
pause.
So the session law that was incorporated in the statute is very clear that it is calendar days. So it's counting calendar days. It's not even business days.
And no pausing for additional information is what I meant.
That's right. There's no pausing for additional information, which the current way that we process all permits does include pausing.
That's what I thought.
And
Okay.
so that's actually the major change that's being introduced here, is that flexibility is no longer there.
Yeah, that was my point. Okay, thank you.
Would the applicant then, if they had to withdraw the application, they'd have to go back and start all over again, pay a new application fee, all that stuff?
So if an applicant wanted to move forward with the modification and it was not issued, then yes. And a withdrawal would mean that. And even today, there's very few withdrawals. Sometimes, obviously, these are business decisions. And we can't control what the applicants as a, entity, making different business decision may or may not do. We're just trying to present you with the information. And, I can't predict exactly the behavior. Hopefully the applicants will just spend a little bit more time before submitting the application or maybe, thinking about all the components necessary so that it's complete from the get-go. Hey, I'll tell you, I'm sure our staff engineers, our permit engineers would love it if it was like perfectly everything in there from the beginning. It does make their lives easier.
Mr. Bailey.
Thank you. Well, then just another question. So since the second period, I don't know what you want to call it, the second period after the completeness determination. So that means the agency might have to ask, I think modeling is a good example of tweaking, because I've worked with a company where we had to keep tweaking the modeling we went back and forth with the agency, not here in North Carolina, but I think it was somewhere in Iowa. And if we couldn't get the company couldn't get the information back very quickly, and the agency is waiting for it, but there's no pause, and then the 270 days passes, is the permit automatically approved?
So it's probably something that our director can answer better than me.
I see he's smiling.
Thank you for the question, Commissioner Bailey. So at the end of the 90 or 270 day clock, the division now has the option to deny the permit, issue the permit, or get a draft permit out to public notice if that's a decision that we make or if it's required. And so the applicant, that would be something we'd be discussing with the applicant if there were significant delays in getting us necessary information in that. If you go back to slide 9, Carrie, one back during that final stage, which is the calendar days of 90 or 270, obviously we'd be communicating with the applicant and making sure they understand what their options are. That's a potential set of outcomes from this. Yes.
Thank you.
And I had one question, Commissioner Lyerly. On the completeness assessment, is that achieved 100% of the time? Or is there a percentage of applications that don't achieve the completeness? And then at that stage, do they have to restart the 45-day clock, or can they correct their application at that time?
Even with processing days, it's not necessarily restarting. There's a pause, right? So it's processing days. So we still have like a review, and it may take 3 days for the permit engineer to realize, oh, this section of information is missing, and then contact the facility. Or it could say, well, this information, I can see why the applicant may have put it on there, but it's actually not applicable for this particular modification. Maybe they thought there was a particular constant that wasn't quite, sometimes you can catch even technical things a little early in the completeness review. But as far as having percentages and analyzing our actual previous permits, I did put a lot of time into that. But what I really found was there's a lot of unique situations. What I can say is most, can the division achieve these processing timelines and make decisions within the new requirements of the statute? That is definitely something that, the division can achieve. Looking at our past processing times, but there's certain exceptions and certain applicants that are outside, these ranges, and for them, it may be different, but those are.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a perspective from the lens of the applicant. They do everything they're supposed to do, 45 days goes up, they're still not complete, and then do they have to go back and go to another 45 days, or can they just amend it and then within 3 days move forward. That's the frustration that I've had in some of these applications in which you finish and then, well, you didn't make it, and so you have to start the clock again. And that just seems like you could be never ending. You could just continue to miss the completeness, and then you just get pushed back forever.
Well, the 45 days are set, and they're currently in there right now, and they're going to keep being in there. And what it would do is it move into the 90 days and the 270 days. So once it moves to that kind of that second phase, that's going to be, for sure there's going to be an end date. So once the 45 processing days are exhausted, then we go into our 90 days of certainty and our 270 days of calendar day certainty. And I don't know if Director Abrazinskis wants to add to that.
And I think that's exactly right, Carrie. I would just add that during that application completeness phase 2 there, we're pausing the clock while waiting on that additional information. And so they wouldn't, if we're in that phase, there's no necessarily starting over. We've got the clock paused, and until we get the information that we need to thoroughly determine completeness
They're
of the
100%
application.
they're always going to be complete by the end of this process.
If it's capable of being complete. So I wouldn't ever say 100%.
So
but
99% of the time, this process works where they're completed by the end of 45 days. I just
Not
know
at the end of 45 days.
Well,
necessarily.
whatever
Yeah.
the appropriate.
45 days plus the amount of days that was paused while we were waiting on the information from the applicant.
Okay.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, it sounds like Commissioner Larley's asking, how long does it take? Does it take 45 days or does it take 180 days? Because whether you pause the clock or whether you send it back to start again, the applicant's losing time, right?
So that just very much depends on the nature of the application. So no, it does not always take 45 days. It could take much shorter amount of time if it's a great application. It's very, minor, straightforward thing for our team to review. But Carrie has mentioned there are lots of different scenarios that we are faced with. And then sometimes those scenarios even change once we have the application and we've started a review. The applicant may come back and say, oh, by the way.
What's your guesstimate? Is it, and Commissioner Larley threw out 99% in 45 days. 50% get done in 45 days? 85% get done in 45 days? What's the 45 days?
So I can't answer this, and I did begin this process to help answer these questions because I had anticipated that there would be these kind of concerns for this particular rulemaking. So you could see that we had kind of a scrunch time period to get this rulemaking together. But it is possible before the EMC, so that we'd have it at the EMC presentation, or even earlier, is some more data mining. Now, when we go into all of our data collection, everything to do with our permitting processes is kept. There's a record of all of the different steps. We're hitting our processing day timelines. No one's really going over processing day timelines. That would be extremely rare and exceptional. But looking at the data preliminarily, we could put together a presentation and add that into our EMC1 for this rulemaking to answer some of those questions with more definitive numbers. I can't give you exact figures right now because I haven't finished doing that. I was hoping to have it done before here, but unfortunately I had a health procedure, and that is, just unfortunately something that happens sometimes because we're human. But those facts and figures are important, and to the best of our ability, it is possible that we can at least get some idea possibly before you when it comes before the EMC to get those kind of numbers and the processing time.
You go with that, Commissioner?
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry.
Both of us.
No, I was just asking Commissioner Larley if that was sufficient for him.
Yeah, again, it is what it is. We don't know quite yet. I guess my comment would really be that looking at the procedure from the user's view, it seems to me that there's increased uncertainty because in my experience with other applications of this nature, the incremental communication events that have a potential time delay lead to really massive inefficiencies. And so when you have a constrained format for communications and the actual application, it can lead to, some challenges. And the challenges that are fundamentally the biggest barriers are the reset if you have a criteria that is not met at some point, and then you have to completely restart versus an amended, unprepared one. It goes 46 days, and, they just needed to put in one more sheet of paper, and you tell them to go back and start at day 45, and they have to wait another 45 days. And that's 2 months, and that's your budget and your financing and everything goes up in smoke because of that.
Different kind of scenario, but if I may, Mr. Chairman, to Commissioner Larley's point, we were working with a local government with permitting issues, land use permitting issues. I was a consultant. And we asked the planning department, well, how many times do you turn these things back to the applicant? Surely twice, maybe? The answer was 8 times, which was unacceptable because to Commissioner Larley's point, that 8 times takes forever to do all those revisions. That's going to happen on an occasional one or not, but on average or on the median, the 50-50, it shouldn't happen. It should be close to 45 days if people are working properly. Right? I mean, that was the example from something else to your point, Commissioner Larley. It's just important to understand that,
Yeah,
how
no,
long that clock runs.
Again, not to say that it's either good or bad, but I think the ability to sort of comment and get people to appreciate why this is an advance, to me, would be facilitated by sort of more information about, how common this is and what are the processes, because I think there are efficiencies on both sides, right? Obviously, you have huge challenges, huge amount of work to do. You want to do it appropriately and efficiently, but I think the users also want to have some idea, is it, typically 45 days and it usually goes through? Is it, 15, if there are 15 requests for additional information, maybe there's a process where there's an FAQ board that says, here are the 15 deficiencies that have affected 90% of the applications. Maybe you should address it before you even submit. Just the things that, again, being a neophyte in this, I've never applied for this one thing, but, I've applied for a lot of federal and state permits, and that always seems to be the thing that has been frustrating for the user, being faced with, an application that, if it's known that there'll be 8 to 10 queries in the application, it seems like we might need to catalog them and address them before they get submitted.
If I may, Mr. Chairman. We'll certainly commit to providing some average timing to address this, but I also want to just mention that at every opportunity that we have before the regulated community, we're sharing tips, tricks, permitting 101 presentations to the regulated community about the forms, the expectations on the data, what it takes to have a complete application. Some of those common pitfalls that we see that require us to go back and say, oh, you forgot this form, or you provided an emission factor, but we don't know where that came from. Do you have the test data, the test report that the emission factor was derived from? So we are constantly helping educate the regulated community on those types of things. We do that several times per year. And so I hope that helps give a little perspective that we are out there sharing those common pitfalls for permitting, and then on the compliance side as well. But obviously we're focusing on permitting here today.
Sure, okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, ma'am.
I just want a little clarification about what information you might be bringing to us. So as I understand it, the 45 days is the days that the agency has to process and the clock is stopped. It's not reset. So if in 15 days, the agency says, I don't understand, you need to support your emission factor that you used in your model, then I thought it's up to the applicant and they can take as long as they want.
So
And
this is,
that's what I wanted to understand, because isn't the application processing 45 days and the agency sticks to the 45 days, but each time you ask for information, it's up to the applicant to turn it around as fast as they want to?
obviously, having the best prepared application from the get-go is the best for the agency and the best for the applicant. That's the best. And for, Title V facilities, that are very sophisticated. They often use outside consultants and internal engineers to prepare their applications. I think in some instances, it must be required that it's, done by someone with a professional engineering license. So in those instances, we are getting high quality applications. But there's always exceptions to that. And, under our 300 rules, there is a wide variety of all kinds of facilities, that may have an application, that may have varying levels of sophistication of who is actually filling out the application. And from my overwhelming impression, having worked with several of our regional staff, permitting staff, and asking them about their experience and like coming up just originally, like, how are we going to integrate these in the rules? What rules should we target of changing? They were telling me about their experience, and they really go out of their way, hand-holding some applicants in particular to help them get through this permitting process within the time period. Because everyone wants to have, a facility, meet our air quality requirements. Everyone wants clean air. We want to have a permit that meets those standards and is issued at the end of the day. That's.
Still have a question. I'm sorry. This is Commissioner Bailey again. I understood that the agency has 45 days, but from the date it's submitted, okay?
Mhm.
And the agency has 45 days, but when they request information, then the 45-day for the agency stops and it's up to the applicant. And that's what's called a pause. And so the pauses are what add time to the 45 days. Once you get past the completeness after the 45 days,
Mhm.
then it's a strict 90 or 270. So what I'm getting at and what Commissioner Solomon brought up is in that 45 days, is the agency pausing the clock by asking for additional information, 8 times, or is it 2 times?
The agency wants to be efficient.
Well, I understand that. I'm just
things- some-
saying,
yeah,
when you're
sometimes
talking about what
Yeah.
we want, what information we want, that's kind of what I think we're getting at.
it's not as if you read the application, you get to page 4, you find something, you're like, whoops, I'm going to stop and then ask, without looking at the rest of the application. There's already an effort now under today's processing to try to ask multiple things. It's just sometimes one thing does follow another because you may get the information, but then it's partial or it's inadequate. And
So I had a clarifying question. So again, we get that, but I guess on average, let's say that last year, there were 1,000 applications, 10 applications, 50 applications, and what percentage of them made it in 45 days, and what percentage of them took, longer than 45 or 90 days?
Yeah, and again, if I can add, I've been on both sides of this. So the applicants always say they want to do it perfect and they did it perfect. And the agency always says, we want to do our best, we'll move it. And you just need to look at the numbers, right? To Commissioner Lowry's point, and I think to Commissioner Bailey's is, it's probably not 45 days, but 50% of them, are they getting done in 90 days or 2 years? Or it's the question back to Commissioner Lowry, what's the end user experience? Whoever's fault it is, how long does it take in numbers standpoint?
I think we understand the question, and what we'll commit to do is bring back some specific statistics for you. If this passes through the commission today, if it's okay with y'all, we'll bring it back for the EMC presentation of this matter. But yeah, so we can do that. We understand the question completely. I can tell you, for example, on the next slide, in that 90-day window, I know what that number is for these non-Title V permits. Our average is about 40 to 45 days. Okay, so I
Total.
know that number. What I don't know is on what you're asking about is that first 45-day period. I don't know that off the top of my head, so we'll bring that back. Understand the question. Thank you.
Mr. Ellis.
Just a couple questions. You said the $43 to $50 an hour, is that for permit reviewers?
this is for those that are preparing so this is based off of data from both the North Carolina and the federal, Board of Statistics for just average income. And this is particularly for those that prepare the application.
The engineers.
So these are the this would be
okay.
the average hourly pay for a private engineer, like outside of
Okay.
the state agency. That's how much they're getting paid per hour.
Those numbers are dated.
This was as of 2020, I believe it was 2020. I have it in the reference,
Okay.
but
I
sorry.
just want to be clear, is that the cost to the state of hiring additional permit reviewers?
Mhm.
Or if that was the cost to the privates or to the regulated community of getting things to you
Mhm.
quicker?
Yep.
How often do pre-application meetings occur?
So that's something outside of what I researched to prepare for this, but Director Aberzinskis would probably know.
Thank you for the question. For PSD permit applications, we require them. Even though it's not a written requirement, we strongly urge them and those occur because it's most complex. For other Title V applications, we recommend that because it's free, right? It doesn't cost an applicant anything to come in and meet with us for an hour, or not much, to meet with us for an hour prior to submitting that application to make sure they have everything that they need. And then, or talk about the nature of the project as well and its complexities, or things that may change after they're going to submit the application to us, because that's often, that's a frequent flyer check mark right there. The project changes after the application comes in, and that kind of changes things in terms of our review. And then same thing for our non-Title V permits. We always offer to folks to have a pre-application meeting if necessary, but they're a lot less frequent for those smalls or synthetic minors that are in the non-Title V or non-major universe.
Okay, thank you. Would you mind going back to the slide that shows the statute and just leaving it up there for a second? Then you can go ahead and do other questions.
The statute. Are you talking about the session law or?
Yes.
Oh, okay. That's in the background. I got you. Thank you.
Well, let me ask a question, but not of you, but of Chair Solomon, if you're satisfied for them to bring that information, that further information to us in November for the full commission, rather than holding this up here in the
I don't want to hold it up. I think they can get the information. I think if we get some quick information on means and medians, maybe by a couple classes, Mike or Carrie, it doesn't need to be that elaborate. I think it is a fair question since we will have the public asking us those questions. So some basic numbers, but let's not hold it up. Just get the numbers.
Right. We'll go ahead today with the vote on it today. Okay, anybody else have any more questions or any further discussion on this one? Well, if not, I would entertain a motion to approve these rule changes to go to the full commission in November. Commissioner Weiss?
Weiss, thank you. Commissioner Carter. I move that the committee approve the proposed rule amendments to 15 NCAC 2Q 0303, 0304, 0305, 0312, 0503, 0505, 0507, 0515, and 0525, and the accompanying regulatory impact analysis to proceed to the EMC for approval to proceed to public comment.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
This is Commissioner Bailey. I second the motion.
Any further discussion? All
I'd
right.
just like to say that I agree that I'd like that information at the full EMC meeting, and I think it can be incorporated into this PowerPoint.
Okay, very good. Then all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No, passes unanimously. Thank you very much. All right, let's see here. Go ahead. Okay. Yeah, Taylor, would you come up next? Trying to find my agenda again. I lost it. Here it is. Okay. This would be a request for approval to proceed to the full commission for approval of a report on quality control measures for Title V permit processing. Also pursuant to Session Law 2023-134, Section 12.17.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Taylor Hartsfield, Deputy Director for the Division of Air Quality. I'm going to do my best to breeze through this quickly, but apologies. I know we're a little bit over time. Here are some common acronyms that you'll hear me say and then found throughout this presentation. All right. I'd like to start with a quick background summary of Session Law 2023-134, which became effective October 3rd, 2023. Section 12.17A through U established a Title V air permit bonus pilot program for qualifying employees who process Title V air permit applications. Qualifying employees within the DAQ are to receive those bonuses after a Title V air permit is reviewed and completed. The pilot program runs from January 1st of 2024 through June 30th of 2025. So we're in that period currently. Section 12.17P requires the Environmental Management Commission to develop quality control measures to measure the consistency and quality of Title V air permit processing that ensures each application is adequately reviewed, and if denied, that there is good cause to deny the air permit. So the session law further requires the EMC to consult with the DEQ and provide this information to be included in an annual report submitted to the chairs of the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee on Agriculture and Natural and Economic Resources pursuant to 12.17R. This annual report is due by December 1st, 2024. Section 12.17R further states that the report shall also include a list of contested cases where the Office of Administrative Hearings has rendered a final decision or order of findings of fact and conclusions of law, or a judgment on the pleadings or summary judgment in favor of a person aggrieved by the department, and an estimate of the resulting costs to the state from the previous year. So as a quick reminder, I'd like to give a brief overview of our Title V permitting section. When fully staffed, there are 28 positions in this section. This includes a section chief, 3 branch supervisors, 4 engineer 3s, 13 engineer 2s, 3 engineer 1s, an environmental specialist, and 3 meteorologists. At the time of preparing this presentation on August 22nd of this year, the section had 6 vacancies. That is still the case today. This section permits all Title V facilities statewide in North Carolina. Again, as just a reminder, Title V facilities are sometimes referred to as major sources. The Title V program was established by Congress in 1990 as part of the Clean Air Act amendments. And the goals of the Title V program include standardizing air quality permits across the country, consolidating air regulations into a single document, and improving compliance by clarifying what facilities must do to comply or to control air pollution. When I originally prepared this slide, we had 307 Title V facilities in this state. I checked our numbers again last night, and we now have 311 Title V facilities. So you can see how it varies from month to month. Also on this slide, I show we have 181 open applications as of August 22nd. This equates to a workload of about 13 projects per engineer. Since this time, we've added about 5 more applications to the total in-house. Here is a chart of the incoming versus outgoing Title V permit application trends over the last 9 years. The 9-year annual average of incoming and outgoing applications is 206 and 210 respectively. This represents a very stable Title V program with outgoing applications just slightly outpacing the incoming applications. Next, I'd like to discuss the types of the Title V permit applications and the public participation process for some of those applications. There are 12 categories or types of Title V permit applications. 7 of these 12 are bonus eligible. In terms of the 181 applications in-house when I prepared this slide, that represented about roughly 50% of those that are bonus eligible. 5 of these 12 categories are required by rule to go through a public process, an EPA review prior to taking final action. This represents about 40% of the 181 applications in-house. The public process is counted towards the total processing days and usually consists of 2 parallel comment periods. 30 days for public comments, and 45 days for EPA comments. Occasionally, the public process may include a public hearing. This is usually determined by the director due to significant public interest in the permit application. The noticing for public hearing may occur at the same time of the noticing for public comment. This may also occur sequentially if significant public comments request a public hearing that was not already planned at the time of noticing for public comment. EPA may also move its review period to sequential if significant public comments are received or if a public hearing occurs, which allows them to review the draft permit after DAQ has made any changes based on public input. This slide demonstrates the trends of the Title V air permit applications that have gone through the public participation process over the last 9 years. I want to note that this table has been corrected during the time it was posted for your review, but the general trends remain the same. We just had to make some corrections to a couple of the numbers. A vast majority of these applications, about 98%, only go through a public comment and EPA review period. Over the last 9 years, 12 applications were noticed to go straight to public hearing, and 4 applications were noticed for a public hearing after being noticed for public comment. You may notice that 2021 was an outlier year for public hearings. Many of these were done virtually due to the pandemic. We also just had a coincidence of several high public interest applications in-house at this time, multiple for wood pellet facilities and coal ash landfill sites. Also during this 9-year period, approximately 10% of the 697 applications that went through the public process received comments from either the public or EPA during this comment period. Now I'd like to shift to discussing the current resources in place in our Title V permitting section that ensures quality and consistency in our Title V permits. All staff within the section have access to the following shells or templates for our draft permits and our draft technical reviews. The Title V permit shell is essentially a blank permit template with sections for a cover letter, table of contents, and list of acronyms. This ensures uniform formatting, table locations, and section headers for all of our permits. All Title V permits list the same set of general conditions at the back of the permit. The general condition shell or template is updated each time the general conditions are changed, including a version identifier. The latest version of the general conditions will be incorporated at the next touch of a permit for a Title V facility. The permit condition shell or template contains specific permit conditions for commonly used regulations. Some examples of commonly used regulations include our 15A NCAC 02D.0540 rule for fugitive dust emissions and 15A NCAC 02D 1806 rule for prohibition of odorous emissions. So those are just examples of ones that are commonly found in all permits. Staff can copy the specific permit conditions they need from this commonly used list to ensure those conditions stay consistent for similar sources. And lastly, we have a renewal technical review shell or template. A technical review, sometimes called a statement of basis, is required for all permitting actions. Title V permits have a renewal cycle every 5 years. The technical review for a renewal application is more detailed as the engineer is tasked with discussing every state and federal rule that applies to the facility to confirm that they are still applicable. This shell ensures that each technical review for renewal of a Title V permit contains consistent content. So when onboarding new Title V permitting section staff, the section chief with the assistance of the 3 branch supervisors make sure that the new staff have access to the shells I just covered on the last slide. In addition, a new permit engineer may be paired with 1 or more experienced engineers to be a point of contact for questions. New engineers may have their work peer reviewed before proceeding to the supervisor review step. Those review steps are all part of a common procedure for processing Title V permit applications, and all new and experienced staff follow. So what is that common procedure? It starts when an application is received and reviewed for acceptance for processing. The application is assigned to a review engineer, and if air dispersion modeling was included with the application, that is routed to the air quality analysis branch, consisting of meteorologists for assignment and review. When an application is deemed complete, meaning that the review engineer has all the information to process the application, the engineer will prepare a draft permit and a draft technical review using the applicable shells mentioned earlier. Then the multiple levels of review can begin. Initially, drafts are shared with an engineer supervisor, the regional office inspector or permit coordinator, and the stationary source compliance branch. We involve the regional office in the review process because the inspector has physically been to the facility at the regional office. So they may identify or catch errors in the draft permit regarding, descriptions of sources or just find conditions that may be unworkable because of the layout of the facility. We involve the stationary source compliance branch as well because they are the group that reviews source testing and continuous emission monitoring systems, or SIMs, that may be relative to that type of facility. The applicant and consultants usually review the draft documents after the internal DAQ staff have reviewed them. If timing of permit issuance is a concern to the applicant, we will share drafts with all parties at the same time. Applicants and consultants are also contacted throughout the drafting phase regarding any questions or additional information requests that the review engineer may have. Throughout this entire process, all comments are collected, reviewed, and modifications to the draft documents are made if necessary. Once draft documents are thoroughly reviewed by multiple parties, they can then proceed to the public participation process if applicable. As a reminder, this may include a 30-day public comment period, 45-day review period for EPA, or a public hearing. Now I'd like to shift to how the EPA reviews the North Carolina Title V permitting program. EPA's federal oversight of the Title V permitting programs began as a result of the recommendations from a 2002 Office of Inspector General audit. This led to the EPA development of an action plan for performing reviews of each state and local air pollution control agencies' Title V permitting program beginning in the federal fiscal year of 2003. North Carolina's Division of Air Quality has been evaluated 4 times since the OIG audit, occurring in 2005, 2010, 2014, and most recently in 2021. The 2021 evaluation consisted of reviewing our staffing resources, management support, Title V revenues and expenses, public participation plans, environmental justice reviews, permit issuance rates, and a detailed review of previously issued permits. The results of the 2021 evaluation by EPA speak to the effectiveness of the quality control measures already in place, the quality of the staff, and the quality of work products from our Title V permitting program. EPA acknowledged that DAQ has qualified and experienced staff and management that are very knowledgeable, professional, and dedicated to their mission. EPA commended DAQ for their enhanced public participation process, including tools for meaningful engagement with the public and communities. EPA noted that DAQ has an excellent record of timely issuance of initial permits and significant and minor modifications. EPA stated that DAQ has an excellent grasp of Title V requirements and is continuously working to find impactful ways to increase their ability to meet all varied program elements. Lastly, EPA shared that the DAQ Title V permits are generally complete and well-written. In addition to these periodic evaluations, there are other ways that EPA has oversight of DAQ's Title V permitting program. For example, we participate in annual permitting program oversight strategy meetings. This last occurred in fall of 2023 and is expected to occur again this fall. EPA and DAQ participate in quarterly check-in calls. And lastly, the Division of Air Quality submits semi-annual Title V operating permit systems, or TOPS reports, that are due each January and July. Our last TOPS report was submitted on July 26, 2024 for the January through June 2024 period. As I mentioned earlier on in this presentation, Section 12.17R of Session Law 2023-134 states that the annual report for the Title V Air Permit Bonus Pilot Program shall include a list of contested cases where the Office of Administrative Hearings rendered a final decision or order with findings of fact and conclusions of law, or a judgment on the pleadings or summary judgment in favor of a person aggrieved by the department. Each Title V air permit includes an attachment to the cover letter highlighting the rights of the permit applicant, the permittee, or other persons aggrieved to file a contested case regarding DAQ's final action on an air permit application. The attachment includes general filing instructions conforming to North Carolina General Statute 150B-23 to be filed with the Office of Administrative Hearings. I want to emphasize to you all that this process very seldom happens due to DAQ's quality control measures already in place. Since 2015, or over the last 9 years, only 4 or 0.2% of the total 2,045 Title V air permits have been challenged. In those very limited 4 instances, all were voluntarily dismissed. I want to mention that there's another process by which a party can submit a Title V petition to EPA regarding DAQ's final action on an application. In the last 10 years, there have been 10 such petitions with EPA's final decisions on 4, and the remaining 6 are still pending EPA action. In all 4 cases that the EPA has decided upon, the petitions were dismissed and the DAQ's Title V permit was upheld. As I approach the conclusion of this presentation, I want to reiterate that DAQ's Title V permitting section already employs quality control measures aimed at promoting quality and consistency in the Title V permitting process and ensures each application is adequately reviewed, and if denied, there is good cause to deny the Title V air permit. Focusing on that last part, I want to share that permit denials are very rare, even more so than permit challenges. This is because Title V permit applicants are unlikely to submit an application that cannot demonstrate compliance with all applicable laws and rules. Rule 15A, NCAC 02Q 0518A addresses this infrequent occurrence already by giving the Division of Air Quality authority to deny a permit application when necessary to carry out the purposes of General Statute 143, Article 21B, and the Federal Clean Air Act. When permit applications are incomplete, DAQ does not deny the permit, but instead works with the applicant to obtain the missing information. Over the last 10 years, we could only recall 1 instance of a DAQ permit being denied. This was actually not for a Title V facility, but for a synthetic minor facility. This denial was due to the air dispersion modeling analysis showing that the emission sources as represented in the facility's application would cause violations of the nitrogen dioxide and sulfur dioxide 1-hour National Ambient Air Quality Standards, or NAAQS, as we refer to them, beyond the property boundary of the facility. As a result of this denial, the facility submitted a new application with changes to demonstrate that they could model compliance with all applicable NAAQS, and their synthetic minor permit was ultimately issued. Before going on to the next slide, which contains the recommendation for the Air Quality Committee today, I want to share how we got to this recommendation. After DAQ carefully considered the language of the Session Law 2023-134, we approached the chair and vice chair of the committee to discuss how to best proceed with Section 12.17P's charge to the EMC to develop the quality control measures. Through the guidance of the chair and vice chair, DAQ was asked to summarize all of the material presented today into what would become a draft quality control measures report, and that was circulated with the full EMC for review and comment. DAQ only received a few comments from Commissioner Tweedy that were shared with AQC chair and vice chair. One of his comments asked for approximate percentages relative to how many Title V permit applications receive public comments and how many final actions lead to permit challenges. As a result, we approximated that 10% of the Title V permit applications receive public comments and added that the statistic of the 0.2% of permits issued in the last 9 years were challenged to the draft quality control measures report. After going through that review process with the full EMC members, DAQ would like to recommend the following as an action item for the Air Quality Committee today. The director recommends that the committee approve the report on the quality control measures for Title V air permit processing due to pursuant to Session Law 2023-134, Section 12.17P, to proceed to the EMC for approval. And just real quick, here is a timeline of the next steps as required by the session law. We hope that we will have AQC's approval of the quality control measures report to proceed to the full EMC tomorrow. Then we hope that the full EMC will approve the report for incorporation into the department's initial annual report that is due to the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee on Agriculture and Natural and Economic Resources due by December 1st. And on June 30th of next year, the Title V air permit bonus pilot program will end and the final annual report will be due by December 1st, 2025. So here is my contact information and I'll take any questions.
Well, let me ask Chair Solomon a question first. Are you satisfied to have this go to the full commission tomorrow for review and approval?
I am, and I am because I think this legislation is pretty robust and long, and our piece is just quality control. So I think in that sense, we've met that with this report, or I'd have given you some comments before now. I would say one thing that crossed my mind, and I think it may be a little bit of field, but it may be something we want to talk about tomorrow. Our role here is quality control, but that's one of about 27 or 28 pieces of this legislation. Clearly, this legislation is looking for ways to make the Title V permitting process go faster. And we're just the quality control piece. So I look at your numbers, you were in the low 200s in 2015 at about 14 permits per engineer. You're off about 10% kind of rolling average over the last 4 or 5 years. And you're still down 13 permits per engineer. However you want to look at those numbers, but the trend is not going up, it's kind of going down, which suggests as far as making it go faster, there's a workflow or a business process problem. I think that's beyond quality control at this point. If you try to make it go faster, we'll have to do different kind of quality control to make sure the quality's there. But I would like some insights tomorrow just to see if you guys feel like there are ways to make this process go faster, which I think is the intent of the legislation. And what that would require if you did, would that require additional quality control measures? But to the chair's question, I think this report answers the mail in that one subsection to me. Now, I don't know what the full commission will say tomorrow, but to answer your question, Chairman Carter, I think that's, if this committee's happy, we can move this on through.
Okay. Any discussion, questions? Commissioner.
Yeah, I wanted to comment that I thought Commissioner Tweedy's suggestions I thought were very helpful, and I think the numerical values of describing the quality as far as the very high performance, the lack of challenges, all of those things I think added a lot of substance to my enthusiasm, and really I think reflected the excellent work that you guys have been doing. So I think it, rather than saying excellent and wonderful, having real numbers attached to the performance really, in my mind, enhanced our ability to say, bravo, this is a high quality activity, and really enthusiastic about the report that you generated.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Any other questions, thoughts, discussion? If not, I'd entertain a motion to refer the report to the full commission tomorrow.
So moved.
Okay, Commissioner Ellison Offered that motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Ellison seconds. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the ayes have it. It's recommended unanimously. Thank you. I think we're on to your informational item and director's report, right? Okay. All right, I'm going to recognize Director Abrazinskis now. He's going to do a quick response on the informational item on the agenda and then do his follow-on director's report.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everyone. I'll keep this short. At the prior Air Quality Committee meeting, we presented a concept with regard to revisions to our permit rules to incorporate pre-permitting activity provisions of the session law that you've heard a little bit about here today, 2023-134 as amended by 2024-1. And during that presentation, or after that presentation, there were a number of questions in committee. And one of those questions was related to whether the division would be seeking input from EPA on this particular provision. This is one that we had identified over the course of 3 different Air Quality Committee meetings over the last year, where we were concerned about the provision possibly being in conflict with the Clean Air Act and federal implementing regulations. And so the question posed to us was, were we going to check with EPA prior to proceeding through a full rulemaking process with this body? And we committed to doing that. And so my report out here today is that we have submitted to EPA a request for parallel processing of the proposed revisions that were required by this provision, specific provision in the session law, and we've asked for their review and feedback by September 30th. We've asked them to either propose approval in a parallel process to this body's actions, or in the alternative, provide a written response by the end of September as to whether the amendments to our state implementation plan incorporating these statutory provisions would be consistent with federal law and the Clean Air Act. And so that's our update for here today on that topic, and I hope to have a more robust update for you in November. If EPA responds a certain way, it'll simply be an update. If they respond another way, we'll be bringing a full rulemaking package with draft rules and a regulatory impact analysis in November.
Very good.
And as far as my other comments, I'll just reserve them for the full EMC tomorrow. Thank you.
Okay, that's perfectly fine. Is there any other business anyone wants to bring before the committee today? Commissioner Bailey.
Thank you. It's not business. Is there a sign-in sheet for this meeting?
There should
On the
be.
table? Sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't see it when I
I'm glad
walked
you asked it
in.
because I don't think I've signed it either.
Okay. Well, we
We
want to
both
make
should.
sure you're recorded as being
I
present.
absolutely, or they'll have to go to the recording. All right, in that event, if there's nothing else, then I'm going to declare this meeting adjourned, and I think we're already overdue for the steering
Yes.
committee. Or-
And the steering committee will go at 11:35. So
Okay.
about 5 minutes.
And air quality is adjourned. Thank you very much.